Sagebrush, Hollow, Montana territory, late summer 1887. The sun wasn't just hot that day, it was merciless. It sat high above the cracked, dusty town of Sagebrush Hollow like a judgment passed down from heaven itself. The wooden boards of porches creaked under the weight of onlookers, and the dirt road split the town in two like an old scar, sun-baked, bitter, and forgotten. Dust danced in lazy spirals as tumbleweed rolled through like it had somewhere better to be. And in the center of the town square, in plain sight of every man, woman, and child, stood a rusted iron cage. Inside, Sarah Wells was curled into herself like she was trying to disappear into the shadows. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, her back pressed to the bars. Her dress, once a proud shade of blue, was now faded and stiff with dirt. Her dark brown hair clung to her neck in sweaty strands, and her skin was a raw, wind-burnt pink. Manacles, too large for her thin wrists, hung slack and cruel around her arms. A wooden sign nailed to the top of the cage read, "No family, no money, vagrant." People passed without stopping. Some spat in the dust. Others stared not with sympathy, but with something colder disdain. One woman whispered to another as she tugged her child's hand away like Sarah might be contagious. From the steps of the general store, Wade Harlan leaned against a support beam chewing tobacco like he had nothing better to do. His hat was stained with sweat, and the way his eyes narrowed told you he enjoyed what he saw. "You lock up a stray, you keep the town clean," Wade muttered to the man beside him. That's when the wagon rolled in. It creaked under the weight of supplies, and 5 quiet little girls sitting in the back, their faces smudged with travel dust and eyes too serious for their age. The man driving it brought the team to a slow halt in front of the saloon. He stepped down, a tall figure, lean but strong, with silver streaks in his beard and deep lines weathered by wind and sorrow. His clothes were plain but clean, his boots worn. No gun was visible on his hip, no badge gleamed on his chest. And yet, as he looked toward the cage, every voice on the street seemed to fall away. Wade spit into the dust and gave a dry chuckle. "You're new here, I reckon," he called out. "That right there's just some beggar trash. Caught her sleeping behind the stables 2 nights ago. Sheriff caged her up before she could start knocking on doors." The man said nothing at first. He just really looked at the woman in the cage. Sarah didn't move. Her head was tilted slightly to the side, her lips cracked from thirst, her eyes open but distant, like part of her had already drifted away. "Why's she in a cage?" the man asked quietly. Wade shrugged. "'Cause she's poor. No husband, no kin, no property, and 'cause we don't much like the look of someone with nothing to lose." The man stepped closer to the bars. Sarah's eyes fluttered, then slowly met his. Hollow, not angry, not pleading, just empty. "She ain't livestock," the man murmured. Wade chuckled again. "Ain't my problem either." From the wagon, the eldest of the 5 girls leaned forward, whispering, "Just loud enough, Papa. Why is that lady locked up?" The man, Nathan Holt, didn't answer her. He crouched down, his voice low. "Can you hear me?" he asked Sarah. She didn't reply. Her breath rattled faintly in her chest. Then he stood, turned to Wade, and said, "I'm taking her." Wade blinked, startled, then burst out laughing. "That right. You planning on adopting strays now? That cage is town property. You break that lock, and it's the sheriff you'll be talking to next." Nathan didn't argue. He just walked back to the wagon, fetched a folded wool blanket, and returned. He crouched again and gently threaded the blanket through the bars. "Here," he said barely above a whisper. "This'll help." For a moment, Sarah didn't move. Then, like a leaf turning toward sunlight, her hand reached out. Her fingers closed around the fabric. She clutched it tight and pulled it around her trembling shoulders. Nathan stood, reached for his belt, and pulled out a hammer. Wade's laughter turned into a shout. "Now, hold on." Nathan swung once. The lock rattled. Swung again. Snap. The rusted metal gave way with a groan, and the door creaked open. A hush fell over the square. A shopkeeper froze mid-sweep. A boy dropped his paper. All eyes watched as Nathan stepped into the cage. He crouched beside Sarah again. "Can you stand?" he asked. Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came. She shook her head, barely more than a twitch. "Then I'll carry you," Nathan said gently. And he did. She didn't fight him. Couldn't. His arms were strong, but not forceful. The blanket shielded her from the stairs. Her head fell against his chest as he walked across the square. Wade shouted something about the sheriff, but Nathan didn't stop. He carried her straight to the wagon where his daughters made space without question. Not one of them asked Sarah's name. Not one of them asked what she had done. They just made room, and they rode. That night, they camped near a shallow creek under a sky painted in violet dusk. Nathan built a fire, boiled water, and handed Sarah a tin cup. She drank slowly. Clara gave her bread. Elsie dried apple. Beth placed a pillow behind her back. The youngest Anna curled up in her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. No one asked her to speak, and still, somehow she felt heard. As night wrapped itself around them and the fire danced golden between branches, Sarah sat wrapped in that blanket, knees drawn close and eyes wide in the dark. Nathan sat nearby whittling a stick into shavings. He hadn't said much since camp. Neither had she. But after a long silence, she finally asked, voice barely more than breath, "Why did you save me?" Nathan paused. The knife stilled. Then quietly, because no one belongs in a cage. His tone was calm, not grand, not heroic, just certain. Sarah looked at him, this stranger, with lines of grief around his eyes and quiet steadiness in his movements. "I don't understand you," she said. "You don't have to." She didn't know then that her life had just changed. Didn't know that the man who had carried her from that cage had wounds of his own, buried deep and silent. Didn't know that 5 girls, none of whom shared her blood, would soon hold her heart in ways she never imagined. All she knew was that for the first time in years, someone had looked at her and not seen a burden. They'd seen a human being, and that was a start to something more, something free. The wheels creaked softly beneath them, groaning with the rhythm of the road as the wagon rolled northward away from the dust of Sagebrush Hollow and into the wide open nowhere. Towering cottonwoods lined the creek side, casting dappled shadows over the trail. The dry wind smelled faintly of pine and sage. Sarah Wells sat hunched on the wagon bed blanket, still wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her body ached in places she couldn't name. Her wrists were bruised, her throat raw from thirst, and every bump in the trail sent another ripple of pain through her spine. But she was no longer behind iron bars. That should have felt like freedom, but all she felt was hollow. Her eyes, sunken and rimmed with red, drifted across the faces around her. 5 girls, each so different and yet somehow the same. They were quiet, unnaturally so, as if silence had become their language, their safety. Clara, the eldest, sat with a book open in her lap, though her eyes hadn't moved over the page for miles. Next to her, Elsie toyed with a string doll, her fingers nimble and distracted. Beth and Ruthie shared a piece of hard candy, trading bites like it was treasure. And little Anna, the youngest, sat pressed against Sarah's side, her small hand wrapped tight around Sarah's fingers like she might blow away if she let go. They didn't speak much, but they watched, especially Anna. And up front, holding the reins with steady hands, was Nathan Holt, their father, her rescuer. Sarah's eyes lingered on him. He hadn't said more than a handful of words since breaking her from that cage, but there was something about the way he held himself, shoulders broad, posture straight, always scanning the trail ahead, that told her he carried more weight than any one man ought to, and not just on his shoulders, in his heart. She turned her eyes back to the dust-choked road, squinting at the endless line of wilderness stretching before them. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice hoarse from disuse. Nathan didn't look back. Home. A single word. So simple, so impossible. Sarah gripped the blanket tighter. "Why me?" His hands tightened briefly on the reins. "Because you were there. That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got." His voice was low, rough as gravel, but not unkind. The kind of voice that had seen too much and still chose gentleness. Sarah looked down at her hands. Dirt lined every crease of her knuckles. Her fingernails were cracked and rimmed in dried blood. She curled them into fists. "You don't even know me." "No," he said, "but I know cages." Those words hung in the air, heavier than anything she could have imagined. The girls glanced up, but none said a word. It was as if they understood, too. A sharp pang bloomed behind Sarah's ribs. She turned away. By midday, the sun had climbed high again, beating down with the same fury as the day before. Nathan pulled the wagon off the trail and into a patch of shade near a cluster of red rock boulders. He set the brake, then helped each of the girls down one by one. When he reached for Sarah, she flinched. "I can walk," she said stiffly. He didn't argue, just stepped aside. Her knees nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. She caught herself against the wagon and gritted her teeth. Nathan said nothing, didn't reach to steady her, didn't offer pity, just let her find her own way. That strangely felt like the first kindness she truly believed. While the girls gathered firewood and filled canteens from the stream, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into the rushing water. It sparkled in the light cold and clear and fast-moving. She hadn't seen water this clean in years. She knelt slowly, dipping her fingers into the current. It stung, sharp and pure and alive. She splashed her face, gasping as the cold shocked the breath from her lungs. Then again, and again. When she finally looked up, Nathan was standing nearby, watching her quietly. He offered a cloth. Sarah took it without a word, pressing it to her face. The blanket slipped from her shoulders and pooled at her feet. She didn't care. "I was 18 when I first got caged," she said, not sure why she was speaking at all. "Not like that, though. Not with iron. With hunger. With cold. With the way folks looked at you like you were already dead." Nathan didn't interrupt. "My father died in the mines. My mother went sick not long after. There was no money, no help, just the world cold and mean and uninterested." Her voice caught. "I tried to find work, tried to be good, but no one hires a girl with holes in her shoes and no last name anyone respects." A long silence passed between them. "Folks say if you're poor, you must have done something wrong," she said. Nathan knelt beside her. "Folks say a lot of things when they're afraid it could be them next." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. His eyes were stormy gray, steady and unreadable. "And you?" she asked. "What are you afraid of?" Nathan hesitated. Then, with quiet honesty, he said, "Losing more than I already have." The words struck something deep. She didn't ask what or who he'd lost. She didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was understanding. That evening, as they made camp, Sarah helped without being asked. She fetched water, gathered stones for the fire ring, and even managed to cook a small pot of beans over the flame. The girls watched her with shy smiles, slowly warming to her presence like kittens too long in the cold. Anna offered her a hair ribbon before bed. It was frayed and faded, but precious. Sarah took it with a lump in her throat and tied it in her hair. She didn't know why she cared so much about the gesture, but she did. Later, Nathan laid out a bedroll for her under the wagon's canvas shade. When she saw that he'd given her an extra blanket and one of the softest pillows, she didn't speak. She just stared at the simple kindness blinking hard against tears. "You don't have to stay," she whispered when he passed by. "I'm not your responsibility." Nathan paused. The fire crackled between them. "No," he said, "but you're still someone." Then he walked away. That night, long after the girls had fallen asleep and the fire had burned low, Sarah lay awake staring at the stars through the gap in the canvas above her head. She couldn't sleep. The ground was soft enough, the air warm, but something inside her refused to rest. She reached up, tracing the ribbon in her hair, feeling its frayed ends. A gift from a child who barely knew her name. A gesture of faith. A reminder that someone saw her as more than the dirt on her skin. A breeze rustled the canvas flap. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. And Sarah Wells, once a girl locked in a cage, closed her eyes for the first time in days. Not afraid of the dark. The Holt homestead wasn't much to look at from the trail. Just a cluster of wooden buildings nestled in a shallow valley at the foot of the crazy mountains. A main cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a rickety barn with a tilting roof, a chicken coop that leaned westward like it was given up, and 3 grazing horses in the pasture beyond. It was land that had been worked, worn, and made to yield not by power, but by perseverance. As the wagon crested the last rise, Sarah caught sight of it and instinctively gripped the sideboard. Her heart thudded with a strange mix of dread and yearning. She'd had places before, places she stayed, never one that stayed with her. The children cheered softly, each recognizing home not as geography but as breath, something they'd missed and now could finally exhale. Even the horses looked up, ears twitching in curiosity at their returning company. Nathan said nothing as he guided the team through the open gate and into the yard, but his jaw clenched tighter than before. Something about his shoulders told her this place held ghosts. Sarah sat frozen as the wagon came to a stop. "You can go inside if you like," he said quietly. "You're not a guest. You're welcome, welcome." The word echoed in her like a canyon shout. "I don't," she began, then faltered. "Are you sure?" Nathan nodded, once solemn and firm. "I wouldn't have brought you if I wasn't." That was the most generous thing anyone had said to her in years. The girls jumped down, all motion and light. Clara and Elsie dashed for the cabin, dragging their skirts through the dust. Ruthie and Beth ran to the barn to greet the chickens and gather eggs, giggling. Little Anna waited at the wagon and looked up at Sarah with expectant eyes. "You can have the cot next to mine," she said with the simple certainty of childhood. Sarah's voice nearly failed her. "Thank you." Inside the cabin, the air was cool, thick with the scent of old timber firewood and something faintly floral lavender, maybe dried and hung from the rafters. The room was wide with a long kitchen table made of rough pine, a stone hearth crackling with warmth, and shelves lined with jars of preserves. A woven rug sprawled near the fireplace, worn thin in the center. 5 small beds hugged the far wall. One cot had been added near the kitchen, fresh linens folded neatly atop it. Her cot. She stared at it like it might disappear. Clara passed behind her with a basket of carrots. "You'll get used to the quiet," she said, not unkindly. Sarah turned. "I'm not used to quiet." Clara paused. "Papa says quiet can be a mercy." Then she went back to peeling. That afternoon passed in a blur. Sarah insisted on helping, though her hands shook and her limbs protested. She gathered firewood, chopped onions with watery eyes, and fetched water from the pump, though it blistered her palms. The girls didn't hover, didn't correct her, just made space beside her like she had always been part of the rhythm. It was strange, like a song she'd once heard in a dream. That night at dinner, they sat together at the long table. Nathan at the head, the girls along the sides, and Sarah at the far end where an extra place had been set. No one said grace aloud, but the silence before eating was reverent. When Sarah reached for a biscuit and her hand brushed Anna's, the girl smiled. Warmth bloomed in Sarah's chest. It wasn't hunger she feared anymore. It was hope. After the meal, Nathan stepped outside to chop kindling under the porch lantern. Sarah followed, wrapping the old wool blanket around her shoulders. "Do they ever talk about her?" she asked softly. He paused, axe held mid-air. "Who?" "Their mother." The axe came down with a hard crack. He didn't answer right away, just split another log. Then, finally, "Sometimes, mostly Anna. She was only 2 when she passed." "How long has it been?" Nathan wiped sweat from his brow. 4 years come fall." Sarah folded her arms tighter around herself. "You never remarried." "No," he said. "Didn't seem right." "Why?" He looked up at her. His eyes, always calm, were darker now in the lantern light. "'Cause some folks you don't replace. You just learn to live with the empty." She nodded, though a lump swelled in her throat. "I know something about empty." "I reckon you do." She stepped closer. "You should know. I'm not planning to stay long. I'll work, earn my keep, but once I've got enough, I'll go." He didn't flinch. "You're free to," he said, "but no one here's asking you to leave." She stared at him. "Why are you like this?" "Like what kind? When the world isn't." Nathan set down the axe and leaned against the porch post. "'Cause the world don't need another man like Wade Harlan. But my girls need someone who can teach 'em different." Sarah blinked hard. She couldn't remember the last time a man had spoken with conviction and no cruelty. She turned away quickly, lest the tears spill. "Thank you. For the cot, the food, the chance." Nathan's voice was gentle. "Don't thank me for what should have been yours all along." That night, Sarah lay on the cot beside Anna's bed, listening to the steady rhythm of 5 girls breathing in sleep. The wind whispered through the cabin cracks, and the embers in the hearth pulsed with soft glow. She should have felt out of place. She didn't, and that terrified her more than the cage ever had. In the morning, life resumed without fanfare. The girls rose early, washed, fed the animals, and began their daily chores. Nathan worked in the barn and pastures. No one barked orders. They just did what needed doing. Sarah found herself scrubbing floors before being asked mending a loose strap on Ruthie's shoe and sweeping the porch where pine needles had gathered overnight. It wasn't servitude. It was contribution, and that made all the difference. By mid-morning, she was sitting on the steps of the cabin mending a torn pillowcase when a shadow passed overhead. She looked up to see a rider approaching. Dusty slouched in the saddle and moving with the ease of someone who belonged to the land. Nathan emerged from the barn and met the rider halfway. Sarah stayed where she was, pretending not to watch, though her stitches slowed. "Sheriff wants a word," the rider said, voice low. "Does he now?" Nathan asked evenly. "Says you broke town property. Freed a vagrant from detainment." "Freed a woman from a cage," Nathan corrected. The rider hesitated. "He says he'll send a marshal if she don't come back." Nathan's voice turned steely. "You tell him there's nothing for him here but a long ride home." Sarah's heart thudded painfully. She stood slowly, blood draining from her face. "He's coming for me." Nathan turned to her. "Let him come. You don't understand. I understand that good men don't let bad ones make the rules." She stared at him. "You'd risk your land, your girls, for me." "No," Nathan said simply. "I'd risk it for what's right." That night, she sat outside under the stars with Clara brushing Anna's hair as the little girl leaned sleepily against her shoulder. The wind rustled through the grass like a lullaby, and fireflies blinked among the fence posts. Clara spoke without looking up. "Papa won't back down." "I know," Sarah murmured. "He won't run either. I know that too. He'll protect you, even if it costs him everything." Sarah's throat tightened. "I don't deserve that." Clara finally looked at her. "He thinks you do." Inside, after tucking Anna in, Sarah paused before her cot. The pillow had been fluffed. A small wildflower lay on the blanket, white, simple, fragile. She picked it up and held it to her chest. Then she whispered into the dark, "Don't let me break this." The first real test came on the 4th day. Morning broke over the valley like melted gold, casting soft light over the cabin roof and shimmering dew across the pasture. The Holt girls were already at their tasks, Ruthie chasing wayward chickens, Beth helping Clara with bread dough, Anna still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Sarah was feeding the goats when she spotted the horseman on the ridge. Her body went rigid before her mind caught up. Dust trailed behind him like a warning. His saddle was too polished, his coat too clean, and his hat sat too stiff on his head. Government man, she thought. Lawman. Or worse, someone pretending to be one. Nathan saw him too. He set down his hammer and walked to the fence boots crunching over dry grass. Sarah wiped her hands on her skirt and followed her heart, a loud drum in her ears. The rider dismounted with a practiced ease and tipped his hat more out of habit than respect. "Mr. Holt," he asked. Nathan nodded. "Name's Eddings, deputy marshal riding out of Three Pines." Nathan gave no greeting, just waited. The man shifted. "Heard tell there's a woman staying here, one Sarah Wells. Town of Sagebrush Hollow says she was removed unlawfully from holding." "I removed her," Nathan said flatly. Eddings didn't blink. "And why's that?" "She was caged like a stray dog. I don't abide cruelty." The deputy glanced past. Nathan saw the cabin, the girls, the land. "You realize that's not how the law sees it." Nathan crossed his arms. "The law's wrong." "That may be, but my orders stand. I'm to bring Miss Wells in." Sarah stepped forward before Nathan could answer. "I'll go," she said quietly. Nathan turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief. "No, it's not your burden." His jaw tensed. "You don't run from men like this. You stand." "I've stood long enough," she said, voice trembling. Eddings looked between them. "It won't be like before. We've got a circuit judge coming through. You'll get a fair say." Sarah didn't laugh, though she wanted to. A fair say like the truth had ever been enough. But before either of them could move, Anna came flying down the porch steps. She ran straight to Sarah, wrapped her tiny arms around her waist, and clung like a vine. "No," she cried. "You can't go. You're ours now." The words cut like a blade through every pretense. Nathan's voice, when it came, was low but certain. "Deputy, you ride back and tell that judge that if he wants to see her, he can do it right here. That's not procedure." Nathan took a step closer. "Then change the damn procedure." Eddings studied him, then Sarah, then the trembling child at her side. Finally he sighed. "I'll give you 3 days," he said. "Judge Larrabee'll be coming through on his way to Fort Jackson. If you're not on that wagon by then, well, I'll have to bring the rest of the badge boys with me." He swung into his saddle. 3 days, he repeated. Then he was gone. The hours that followed were thick with silence. The girls returned to their chores, though more somberly. Anna never strayed far from Sarah's side. She clutched her hand as they walked, leaned against her while she churned butter, and stared at her with wide, pleading eyes, as if she could hold Sarah here by will alone. In the evening, Nathan invited Sarah to sit out on the back porch. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with streaks of blood and fire. He handed her a cup of warm cider. "You don't owe us your freedom," he said. Sarah stared into the mug. "It's not that simple. It could be. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." He looked at her, then truly looked. "You think trouble's never been here before my wife died giving birth to Ruthie? I've held sick girls through fever nights. Shot a coyote in the pantry once." He smiled faintly. "Trouble's got its own chair at our table." Sarah almost smiled. "I don't know how to belong Nathan." He leaned back, mug resting on his knee. "You don't start with belonging. You start with staying." That night, Sarah dreamed of bars. But they weren't iron this time. They were made of memory, thin and cold and impossible to shake. She saw her mother's hands trembling over a cold stove, her father's boots disappearing down the alley, her own voice begging anyone for work, for bread, for mercy. She woke gasping, but she wasn't in a cage. She was in the cabin. Anna was asleep beside her, one hand resting lightly on Sarah's arm. She didn't cry. She reached up, pulled the little girl closer, and let the past drift away. The next morning, they prepared. Nathan and Clara rode into town to speak with an old friend of his, Silas Boone, a retired lawyer who owed him a few favors. The girls and Sarah worked the land, cleaned the house until it shone, and even baked a fresh pie apple with a thick golden crust. "If we're going to meet a judge," Clara said, wiping flour from her hands, "then let him see the truth of who we are." Sarah nodded. The truth. Not dressed up, not desperate, just real. That evening, Nathan returned with news. "The judge agreed to come here," he said. "He'll arrive tomorrow with a clerk and one of the circuit marshals." "And if he still wants me back in that cell?" Sarah asked. Nathan's voice turned to steel. "Then he'll have to answer to me." The next morning arrived with the hush of storm winds, no thunder, but something in the air that warned of change. Sarah wore her cleanest dress. Clara helped braid her hair. The girls sat quietly on the porch, each one in their best legs swinging as they waited. When the judge arrived, he wasn't what Sarah expected. Judge Larrabee was a wiry old man, with a wild mustache and boots that had seen more courtrooms than cattle. He stepped from the wagon with a cane, peered at Sarah like a crow sizing up a scrap, and said, "Well, let's hear it." They sat at the long table inside the Holt cabin. The judge scribbled notes while Sarah told her story, not theatrically, not tearfully, just honestly, about the cage, about the lack of charges, about the cold. When she finished, silence held the room. Then Clara spoke. "She's kind to us. She helps. She listens." Beth added, "She sings while she cooks." Even Ruthie said she's brave. Finally, little Anna stood on her chair and said with all the fierceness her tiny lungs could manage, "She's not a criminal. She's our Sarah." The judge set down his pen. "Well," he said gruffly, "seems to me if a man's home is where he lays his head, then a woman's justice is where she's no longer hunted." He glanced at Eddings. "This case is closed." Sarah's breath left her in a rush. Nathan offered his hand. She didn't take it. She threw her arms around him and wept into his shoulder as the judge quietly excused himself. That night, the Holt cabin glowed brighter than ever. The fire roared. The girls sang. They danced even if the steps were clumsy and laughter cut through every verse. Sarah sat near the hearth arms, full of Anna Hart, full of something she hadn't dared name before. Belonging. Nathan leaned against the doorframe watching them. She met his gaze. He nodded once, and in that moment she knew. She wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. The days following the fire passed like ash on the wind, quiet, choking, and too fast to catch. Though the barn was lost and the girls had cried themselves to sleep more than once, Sarah woke each morning with her arms still around Ruth or Anna, as if her body knew she had something precious to protect. Nathan rose early, as always. But since the fire, he took longer, walking the fence line, longer, looking at the tree line. He said little, but Sarah could read the tension in the way his fingers curled around a mug, or how he cleaned the rifle twice instead of once. Sarah spent her mornings sewing, patching the girls' clothes, then her own. The shoes he had given her sat by the door, always clean, always ready. She wore them now like armor, but that note had unsettled the soil beneath them all. She comes back by week's end or the whole place burns. Victor Slade had meant it. He wasn't a man of many words, but the ones he used were sharp and real. Sarah could still hear his voice, could feel it under her skin like old bruises. That Tuesday, the wind shifted. Nathan came in late from town dust, clinging to his shoulders like worry. His jaw was locked, eyes hard. "The sheriff won't intervene," he said, hanging his hat. "Says if we want peace, we should stay quiet." Sarah stood from the hearth, wiping her hands on her skirt. Peace for who? Nathan didn't answer. He crossed to the window and stared out, watching the girls chase each other through the yard. He thinks a man like Victor still holds too many friends in town. Too many favors. Sarah stepped beside him, the smell of cornbread still clinging to her apron. "And what do we hold?" Nathan turned to her. Each other. That night, they lit lamps in every room. Sarah double-checked every window latch. Beth helped gather spare blankets and cloth in case smoke returned. Ruth sharpened kitchen knives beside her father, mimicking his quiet focus. Even Anna, barely old enough to understand, stayed close, her little hands threading her rag doll's dress tighter than before. They didn't say fear out loud, but it sat in every silence. On Thursday, a soft rain fell through the valley, but the wind that carried it felt wrong. Not refreshing. Ominous. Nathan sat on the porch, a cup of coffee untouched beside him, boots muddy from reinforcing the barn's rear wall. Sarah joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "They'll come tonight, won't they?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the trail winding out from the trees. "It's the last night before week's end." She nodded. "Then we don't run." "No," he said quietly. "We make our stand." Inside, the girls read together by firelight. Beth whispered one of the stories Sarah had stitched together from memory about a brave mare and a lost child who found each other in the desert. Clara leaned against Ruth Anna, asleep in Elsie's lap. It felt like a moment borrowed from a different life. Then came the sound of snap from beyond the fence. Nathan stood. "Get the girls to the back room." Sarah moved fast. Inside now, she whispered. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted like a storm watcher reading the sky. She bolted the door just as boots hit the porch. Victor's voice rang out clear and unbothered. "Evening, Holt. Came for what's mine." Nathan's rifle was already in hand. "There's nothing here for you." "A woman who belongs to me," Victor said smoothly. "A debt to collect. One way or another." Nathan stepped outside. Sarah stayed just behind the door, peeking through the slat. Victor wasn't alone. Ezra was there, his left arm bandaged, his right hand twitching near his hip. And a third man, tall, broad face covered in dust and shadow, a hired gun by the look of him. Nathan didn't blink. "You trespass. You threaten. You'll regret both." Victor smirked. "Regret's a rich man's problem. I just want my property." "I told you," Nathan growled, "she's not yours." Behind him, Sarah loaded the pistol he'd left for her. Her hands trembled, but her breath didn't. Victor raised his voice, theatrical now. "You think hiding behind women and orphans makes you a man? You think love changes what she owes." Nathan didn't respond. He took one step forward and cocked his rifle. You're not taking her." For a moment, silence fell like the eye of a storm passing overhead. Then Ezra moved. He swung his revolver up fast, aiming toward the window, toward where he guessed Sarah stood. Nathan fired. The rifle cracked loud and final. Ezra dropped like a sack of grain, screaming and clutching his thigh. The hired gun hesitated, surprised by the speed and force of the shot. Sarah fired too, not a kill shot, but enough to shatter the lantern beside the man. Fire erupted along the porch edge, startling the horses and casting wild shadows. Victor drew his weapon, but Nathan was already moving. He tackled the man to the ground, the gun clattering across the dirt. They rolled fists, flying curses drowned in the roar of nearby thunder. Inside, Sarah heard the scream Beth's voice. She bolted through the hall. Ezra, wounded but still breathing, had dragged himself to the back and grabbed Anna, pressing his bloodied arm around her waist like a human shield. Sarah didn't hesitate. She raised the pistol again, voice low but hard. "Let her go, or you lose the other leg." Ezra bared his teeth. "She's just leverage. She's just a child." Behind him, Elsie had crept up with a fire poker. One clean swing. Ezra crumpled. Sarah scooped Anna into her arms and didn't stop running until she reached the front porch again. Victor was on his knees now, hands behind his head. The sheriff finally arrived, gun raised. "That's enough," Sheriff Dalton said. "I saw the fire. I heard the shots. I don't need more proof." Victor didn't resist this time. But as the cuffs clicked shut, he looked at Sarah, smiling with his eyes. "You can cage me now," he hissed, "but chains don't hold forever." Dalton shoved him toward his horse. Ezra groaned from the side yard where Elsie stood over him, poker still in hand. Sarah walked to Nathan. He was bruised, cut near the temple, but upright. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd asked every day since his wife died. She touched his face. "You stayed." "I said I would." The sheriff paused before mounting. "He's going to appeal. Might even get out. You'll want to consider moving on." Nathan nodded. "We were already planning to." Dalton glanced back at the girls, peeking through the doorway. "Good," he said. "Find a place with a school. You've already built one family. Maybe it's time to build the town." That night, as the fire died low, the girls curled beside Sarah on the old rug. Ruth clung to a blanket, Beth to a half-burnt storybook. Nathan cleaned his rifle without a word. Sarah stood on the porch. The moon hung high, casting light over the broken barn and trampled garden. Nathan stepped behind her. "You okay?" She nodded, then whispered, "He's not the storm." "I was." He looked at her. "I brought all this, Nathan. You didn't ask for any of it. I asked for you." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the stars. "I don't know how to be what they need." He smiled gently. "You already are." She leaned into him. For the first time, it didn't feel like a mistake. Inside, Anna began to sing softly in her sleep. A lullaby Sarah had taught her once hummed to her in a cage now echoing in a home she helped defend. Outside, the wind quieted. The ridge behind them stood tall and still. And for one breathless moment, they felt it, the first warmth after the storm. A beginning. The wind had shifted by late afternoon. Nathan Holt knew it before he saw the dark smudge rising against the sky. The scent of charred wood threaded through the air, faint but unmistakable. He stood near the barn, sharpening a hoe when the first curl of smoke traced the ridge to the south. His jaw tensed. He laid the tool down gently and scanned the tree line. Inside, Sarah was braiding Ruth's hair by the parlor window. The younger girls played nearby with scraps of cloth, turning them into doll dresses. The calm in that moment was a fragile thing, quiet as dew before a prairie fire. Sarah sensed it before she heard Nathan's boots on the porch. She looked up, met his eyes through the glass, and saw what wasn't said. She stepped outside. "It's him, isn't it?" Nathan nodded once. "Smoke just south. Close enough to matter." "Do you think they're watching?" "I think they never stopped." Behind them, Clara appeared in the doorway. "Papa," Nathan's voice softened. "Go help your sisters pack their bedrolls, just for the night, like we practiced." Clara didn't question. She turned and disappeared, her voice rising in calm instruction to her sisters. Sarah looked toward the ridge again. The wind had picked up. "We won't be able to run if he sets fire to the land." "We're not running," Nathan said firmly. "We're standing our ground." She hesitated. "But if the barn burns, we'll rebuild it. But we can't rebuild what they'll take if we show our backs." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. Fear coiled in her belly, but so did something else steal. A year ago, she would have run. Now, with the girls in that house, with Nathan beside her, she would fight. That evening, the family moved with quiet coordination. Bedrolls and blankets were tucked beneath tables and chairs. Lamps were lit and placed in each window. Sarah filled basins, checked the fire buckets. Clara helped Elsie lace up her boots. Ruth fetched water from the creek. No one cried. No one asked questions. Even Anna, the youngest, sensed the weight in the air and held Sarah's hand tight. Nathan placed his rifle across his lap and sat by the front door. Sarah joined him, the silver chain around her neck cool against her collarbone. It had become a comfort, Faith's name etched into the pendant, a memory turned into protection. "Do you think he'll come tonight?" she asked. Nathan didn't answer immediately. "He's not patient. And Ezra's the kind to strike when he thinks you're tired." "He's not wrong," Sarah admitted. "I am tired." "But not broken," Nathan said. She looked at him then, and despite the looming danger, she smiled. Not anymore. They sat in silence, the kind that comes only when two people know the worst might be ahead, but choose to be present anyway. The sky deepened from cobalt to ink. Somewhere in the trees, a coyote yipped. A breeze stirred the long grass. The girls settled into blankets, nestled like birds in a nest too small for fear. Then came the sound, glass shattering, a scream. Sarah was on her feet in an instant. Nathan grabbed the rifle, flung open the door. Smoke poured through the kitchen window. Clara's voice rang out from the back room. Ruth cried, "Mama!" Sarah raced through the house, throwing open the back door. Flames licked the side of the barn, the dry hay catching fast. Firelight danced in the yard. Ezra Slade stood there, revolver drawn, dragging Clara by the arm. "Let her go," Sarah shouted, her voice cracking. Ezra sneered. "She's just the price for your pride, sweetheart." Before Sarah could lunge forward, Nathan's voice rang out low and deadly. "Put the gun down, Ezra." Ezra whirled toward him, shoving Clara behind him, pistol raised. Nathan didn't flinch. "You think you can steal what was mine?" Ezra spat. "She was never yours," Nathan growled. "And you just crossed the line you won't come back from." Smoke billowed across the yard. The flames hissed like vipers. In the confusion, Sarah made a choice. Fast and fearless, she darted left around the barn, circling wide. Nathan raised his rifle. "Drop her," he barked. Ezra hesitated. Just long enough. Sarah slammed into him from behind. Clara twisted free, stumbled into Nathan's waiting arms. Sarah hit the ground hard, but she rolled scrambling to her feet. Ezra cursed and leveled his gun just as a shot rang out. The bullet grazed Ezra's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He shrieked in pain, clutching the wound. Victor Slade stepped from the shadows, then, slow and smiling like the devil himself. "Well, well," he said, cocking his revolver. "Didn't think you'd get this far." But before he could fire, another voice cut through the smoke. "Drop it, Victor." Sheriff Dalton stood behind him, shotgun leveled. Victor turned slowly, eyes narrowed. "You picking sides now, Sheriff?" Dalton didn't blink. "Yours burned my barn, too. That makes it personal." Victor dropped the pistol. Ezra, bleeding and panting, slumped against the porch rail. Deputies swarmed in behind Dalton. It was over. For now. That night, as the barn smoldered to embers and the girls huddled beneath quilts, Sarah stood by the window, unable to sleep. Her lip was split. Her hands trembled. But her heart beat steady. Nathan found her there. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You all right?" "No," she whispered, "but I will be." He nodded. "Then we build again. I can't keep bringing danger to your doorstep." He turned her to face him. "This is your doorstep now, too." Tears welled in her eyes. She leaned into him. His arms came around her like a shield. Outside, the first stars blinked to life. Smoke curled into the sky, black against the pale moon. "I thought freedom would feel like running," she murmured. "It feels like standing still," Nathan said, "when everyone tells you to run." She smiled faintly. "You're full of wisdom, aren't you? I've had time to learn." Later, Sarah slipped into the girls' room. They were all asleep, even Clara, who clung to a small rag doll like a lifeline. Sarah knelt, brushed hair from Clara's brow, and kissed her forehead. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I swear it." Back in the parlor, she found the silver pendant beside the fire. She lifted it, traced her thumb over the name. Faith. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a passing torch. She whispered, "I'll carry her memory, but I'll also carry my own." Nathan didn't speak. He simply reached for her hand and held it. In the morning, the smell of smoke still clung to the curtains. The barn was a black skeleton, but the girls played in the yard like wildflowers after a storm. Life, stubborn and sweet, refused to be snuffed out. Sarah stepped onto the porch. Nathan was already there, oiling his rifle. She leaned against the post beside him. "Did I ever thank you?" He looked over. "For what?" "For not turning away the first time you saw me in that cage. You never had to thank me for that." "Well, she said I'm doing it anyway." He tipped his hat. "You're welcome, Miss Wells." She narrowed her eyes at him. "It's Holt now, isn't it?" Nathan grinned. "Not officially." Sarah smiled. Then the grin faded from his face. His gaze drifted to the edge of the woods. Another letter, pinned to the gate with a rusted blade. Nathan rose, striding across the yard. He tore the paper from the wood. The message was short. "Still mine. You'll never be safe." Sarah read it. Her breath hitched, but this time she didn't look afraid. "I'll never belong to him again," she said. Nathan crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire pit. Flames caught fast. "We're not done yet," he said. "No," Sarah agreed, stepping beside him. "But we're ready." She glanced at the horizon where the sky blushed with early sun. Light spilled across the land, burned but standing. A promise, a reckoning, a beginning. The first frost arrived like a warning. It clung to the window sills, turned the morning breath to mist, and coated the fence posts in white. Winter was coming, but something colder still hung in the air around the ranch. A silence that wasn't peace, a calm that wasn't rest. Sarah had felt it before on the night before Ezra dragged her from her mother's arms. On the morning she'd given birth behind a church stable alone and bleeding. And now, as she looked across the horizon from Nathan's porch, she felt it again. Danger wasn't coming. It was already here. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, the chill in her bones, not from the wind. Nathan emerged from the barn, his boots crunching against frostbitten earth. "She didn't sleep again," he said, nodding toward Clara. Sarah sighed. "She heard something last night. Said it sounded like a horse at the edge of the woods. I thought maybe it was just nerves, but now I'm not so sure." Nathan glanced toward the tree line. "They're watching. waiting. I thought after the fire they'd be done. No, he said quietly. They're just getting bolder. Sarah turned to face him. So, what do we do? Nathan's eyes hardened. We end it. That night, Nathan summoned Sheriff Dalton to the ranch. The lawman arrived just past sundown dust, clinging to his coat, a rifle slung over one shoulder. Dalton stepped onto the porch, his eyes scanning the darkened treetops. "You sure you want to do this, McCall?" he asked, voice low. "Cornering wolves makes 'em bite." Nathan nodded. "They already bit. We just didn't bleed enough for them to be satisfied." Dalton looked over at Sarah, who stood quietly in the doorway, with her arms wrapped tight across her chest. "You know, they might not come quietly." "They won't," Sarah said flatly. "But I'm not quiet either. Not anymore." Dalton studied her, then gave a slow nod. "Then let's flush them out." By morning, the plan was set. Nathan and Sarah would ride out to Willow Gulch, the abandoned land once held by Ezra's family, now long neglected and legally owned by Nathan's kin. It was Ezra's pride, and more than that, it was where he believed no one would dare challenge him. That made it the perfect place. Dalton would ride behind them, out of sight, but close enough to step in if things went sideways. 2 deputies and 3 neighboring ranchers would flank the area on both ends, rifles loaded but holstered. They wouldn't fire unless they had to. Sarah dressed in her thickest coat and boots. She wore a scarf that Clara had given her that morning, and under it, tucked into the waist of her skirt, was a pistol. Small old, but loaded. Her hands trembled as she mounted the horse, but her gaze was steady. Nathan rode beside her in silence. The weight of what was coming hung between them like a storm waiting to break. They reached the gulch just before dusk. The land spread wide and low, with thorny brush crawling over forgotten fences and skeletal trees leaning like old men lost in prayer. Nathan lit a lantern and placed it on a high post, the signal they'd agreed upon. Then they waited. Minutes passed. The wind picked up. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat fast and shallow in her ears. Then hoofbeats. 3 riders approached from the east, shadows stretched long across the frost-covered ground. Ezra rode in the middle. He looked worse than before, his left arm in a sling, his coat scorched at one side and his lip curled in a perpetual sneer. But his eyes burned with hatred, wild and familiar. Beside him was Victor, bruised but upright, and a third man Sarah didn't recognize. All 3 dismounted as if the land already belonged to them. Ezra took a step forward, boots crunching dry earth. "Well, well, look what the crows dragged back," he spat. Nathan said nothing. Ezra's gaze shifted to Sarah, narrowing. "You just couldn't stay quiet, could you?" "I stayed quiet long enough," she replied. "You don't own this land, Ezra. You don't own me, and I'm done running." Ezra laughed, but it wasn't joyful. "You're done all right, both of you? You thought burning my name out of your life would be enough? You forget who I am." "I remember exactly who you are," Nathan said, stepping forward. "And I know who I am, too. I'm the man who's going to end this." Ezra's hand twitched toward his belt. From the ridge above, Dalton called out, voice firm. "Don't." Ezra froze. The sheriff and his deputies stepped into view. Rifles, raised eyes sharp. "You're surrounded," Dalton said. "Put your weapons down." Victor panicked, reaching for his revolver. One of the ranchers fired a warning shot that struck the dirt by his boot. Victor dropped the gun like it burned him. Ezra's eyes darted, his jaw clenching. "You wouldn't," he hissed at Nathan. Nathan lifted his rifle slowly, steady and unshaking. "Try me." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Ezra dropped his gun. Sarah let out the breath she'd been holding. Dalton stepped forward, cuffs already out. "You're wanted for arson threats against a child and attempted murder. You're done, Ezra." Ezra didn't resist. Not because he'd accepted it, but because his world had shrunk, and he knew it. The ride back was quiet. The frost had melted slightly, and the sky above shimmered with stars, cool and distant, like they were watching. Sarah rode beside Nathan, her fingers still numb, but her chest felt light. The girls came running when they arrived, surrounding Sarah with tearful joy. Clara clung to her leg, whispering, "I knew you'd come back." Nathan picked up little Ellie and spun her gently, her laughter like music that hadn't played on the ranch in years. Inside, they lit the fire and shared warm bread and venison stew. Dalton stayed just long enough to tip his hat and tell them Ezra was locked up in Pine Ridge with no chance of bail. Victor would face his own charges, and the third man was already talking. "I don't think they'll bother you again," Dalton said as he left. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching his horse disappear into the dark. Nathan came beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist. "It's over," he whispered. Sarah looked at the moon above, full and glowing like hope. "No," she said, "it's just beginning." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She rose and walked out to the barn, where the horses stirred gently in their stalls. She sat on a hay bale, letting the silence wrap around her. Nathan found her there barefoot and thoughtful. "Cold?" he asked. "A little," she said. He draped a coat over her shoulders and sat beside her. "I never thought I'd have this," she murmured. "A night where I'm not afraid." "You earned it," Nathan said softly. "So did you." She turned to him. "I need to ask, what made you take me in? Really?" He paused, looking down at his calloused hands. "Because when I saw you in that cage, Sarah, I saw someone who hadn't given up, even when everything tried to make her." She reached for his hand, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The first snow came with a hush. It floated down like feathers from a torn pillow, coating the land in soft white silence. The kind of quiet that only came after the storm had passed, after the wounds had been tended and the monsters banished. It settled on the roof of Nathan's cabin, on the fence rails the girls had helped repaint, on the worn hats hung by the door. A new season, one not defined by survival, but by something gentler. Inside, the fire crackled low. The smell of cedar smoke mingled with venison stew and bread fresh from the hearth. Sarah stood in the kitchen apron, dusted in flour, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her hands worked without thought, kneading, seasoning, stirring, because for the first time in her life she wasn't cooking to please or to appease. She was cooking for family. Behind her, Clara giggled as Tessa tried to show the younger girls how to make paper snowflakes. Their scraps littered the floor like confetti from a festival, and Ellie kept sticking hers to the window, watching them melt against the warm pane. "Dinner's almost ready," Sarah called. Nathan's voice answered from outside, muffled by the snow. "Girls, bring in the kindling before the stew's cold." Boots pounded on the porch. Clara ran to the door, swinging it wide as the twins barreled in behind her cheeks, flushed red with winter and joy. Sarah wiped her hands and turned to the fire, adding a final log. The warmth spread through the room and through her chest. A month had passed since Ezra had been taken away in chains. No word had come from the jailhouse in Pine Ridge, and she didn't ask for any. Victor had turned state's evidence, trading his silence for safety, and the third man had never even looked her in the eye again. Sheriff Dalton promised they'd stay locked away for a long time, but the peace that settled over the ranch didn't come from justice alone. It came from knowing they were no longer prey. They were free. That evening, after supper had been devoured and the dishes stacked neatly beside the basin, Nathan sat by the fire with little Ellie curled against his side. He held a carved wooden horse in his hands, the one he'd been whittling for weeks in secret. He handed it to her. "For you, Ladybug." Her eyes lit up like lanterns. Really? Built it just for you. She hugged it to her chest. He needs a name. Then you best pick a good one. Ellie looked thoughtful. I'll name him Hope. Sarah's breath caught. The room fell quiet. Not because it was sad, but because something sacred had been spoken aloud. Hope. The word settled over them like a blanket. That night, after the children had gone to bed, after Sarah had tucked them in, after Clara whispered Mama and kissed her cheek, she stepped outside to the porch. The snow had stopped leaving the world, frozen in silver light. Nathan joined her a moment later, 2 steaming mugs in hand. He handed her one. Coffee, strong and hot. They sipped in silence for a while, watching their breath curl into the moonlight. She called me Mama again, Sarah whispered. She sees what we all see, Nathan said. You were born for this. You just didn't have anyone give you the space to become it. Sarah stared out at the darkened barn, the trail of smoke drifting from its roof. I used to dream about a place like this, only it was never real in my dreams, always out of reach. Nathan reached for her hand. And now, she looked up at him, eyes soft. Now I don't have to wake up. In the days that followed, the ranch settled into a rhythm. Nathan taught the girls how to fix the chicken coop. Sarah mended clothes and read books by the fire. The twins insisted on braiding each other's hair every morning. Ellie named every calf, even the bulls. Tessa practiced lassoing the fence post with a rope Nathan cut down for her. And Clara wrote stories. Long ones, the kind filled with bravery and wild horses and women who never bowed. Sarah kept one of Clara's stories folded in her apron pocket. Just in case I forget who I'm trying to be, she told Nathan with a smile. The proposal came on a quiet afternoon. Snow had melted enough that the land turned soft beneath their boots. Nathan led Sarah out to the edge of the pasture where the trees thinned and the creek still trickled beneath a crust of ice. He knelt not with grand speeches or nervous hands, but with steady eyes and a small carved ring made of polished pine wood. "Will you be my wife, Sarah?" She laughed softly, the sound trembling. "You already made me yours the day you gave me this home. Then let's make it real," he said. She nodded, kneeling with him, her forehead resting against his. Yes. The wedding was held 3 days later in the barn. Clara hung paper snowflakes from the rafters. Tessa insisted on sweeping the floor 3 times. Ellie carried wildflowers in a basket, most of them already wilted from the cold, but beautiful all the same. The twins wore matching blue dresses, hand-me-downs from town, and they tied white ribbons in Sarah's hair. Sheriff Dalton officiated. He stood in a clean coat, holding a worn Bible and trying not to smile too wide. Nathan wore his best shirt, missing a button, but clean, and Sarah wore the same shawl she'd had when she first arrived. It still smelled faintly of smoke and flour and memory. They stood before the fire as the sun set, hands clasped, and spoke vows without need for perfection. "I promise," Nathan said, "to build a life where you never feel caged again. I promise," Sarah whispered, "to never stop choosing you. And these girls. Every single day." Dalton closed the Bible and tipped his hat. "Then, I reckon you're husband and wife." Clara whooped. The twins cheered. Ellie cried, then hugged both of them at once. Nathan leaned down and kissed Sarah not just as a promise, but as a thank you. For surviving. For choosing him. For becoming more than he ever dreamed. That night, when the children were tucked in and the fire had died down to embers, Sarah stepped out into the yard once more. The stars above were endless. The ranch was quiet. Nathan came behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" she asked. "Before all this." "No," he said, kissing her shoulder. "This is a better kind of quiet. I used to think I didn't deserve peace." "You never thought wrong," he said. They just taught you wrong." She turned to face him. "Then maybe it's time I teach myself something new." "Like what?" She smiled. "How to belong." He kissed her again, and this time the kiss didn't carry sorrow. Only joy, only warmth, only home. Epilogue. Clara's first book was published 5 years later. She dedicated it to my real mother, Sarah, who taught me that strength is quiet and love is loud. Nathan built a second cabin, smaller, tucked near the pines, where Sarah wrote letters and stories, where she cried and healed and dreamed. The cage they once locked her in rotted to dust behind the sheriff's office. No one replaced it. They didn't need to, because Sarah wasn't afraid anymore. She'd walked out of the dark and into the light of a life that was hers.